I'm Tegan. Welcome to Spotlight on New Zealand. Tonight we focus on one of New Zealand's greatest tragedies, the sinking of the Wahine. Throughout tonight's show we will try to find out as much as possible about the disaster, so we, as a nation, can begin to understand this terrible tragedy.
On the morning of the 10th of April, 1968, after an overnight voyage from Littleton, the ferry Wahine encountered the worst of a violent southerly storm, with winds gusting 160 kilometers per hour while entering the Wellington harbour. With passengers terrified and feeling very ill indeed, the captain and his crew attempted to get their ship back on course and out of danger. After many hours, the passengers and crew had to abandon ship and were flung out into the rough seas of the harbour in life rafts. They had to make the perilous crossing to Wellington's rocky shores, where they were met by local Wellingtonians, desperate to help. These rescuers could see the state of the harbour and understood how difficult the crossing had become, perhaps even before those on board had realised. We are lucky enough tonight to have footage recovered of a resident in the seaside village of Eastbourne back in 1968. They were among the many heroic rescuers on that fateful day.
Here's Wellington correspondent Janae with her 1968 report.
Hello, I'm Janae, and here we have Jada and Bill, two very brave and very heroic rescuers. Thank you for joining us today. You must be exhausted. Jada, could you describe what the weather condition was like?
Yes, it was a cold night. The storm was mega strong. It was almost like a hurricane.
It was a cold night. The heaps of boats was moving around. The wind was loud.
Jada, how would you react if you had to do that again?
My reactions would be scared and unusual.
Bill, do you have anything to add on to that?
I feel scared because I might have bad dreams and I'll never see my family again.
Finally, Jada, could you describe how you felt?
I felt frightened, nervous, and very dizzy. I could not hear myself think.
I can see you guys are still in shock. You guys must have had a dramatic experience. But thank you. Signing off on this very bleak day for New Zealand's history.
An interesting interview. Our thanks to Janae for sending us that old report.
Those unfortunate enough to be on the Wahine on the 10th of April 1968 had to deal with a very rough night and day. Many passengers were throwing up continuously on those extremely rough seas. The passengers were all told that the storm would pass and to hold tight. Most thought it was a typical Wellington southerly storm and that the Wahine would ride it out. Unfortunately, at 6:41 a.m. the Wahine was carried on to the rocks of Barrett Reef, sustaining serious damage to the length of her hull. The starboard, that's right to us landlubbers, and the port, that's left, engine stopped working. The anchors were dropped, but it was some time before they held firm. Rescue attempts were made impossible by the raging gales and massive swells. By early afternoon, all 734 passengers and crew were ordered to abandon ship and get into the life rafts. Only 4 of the 8 rafts could be used because of the angle of the now sinking ship. All 734 people on the ship managed to escape, but due to the stormy seas, 51 lost their lives. We can only imagine what those giant waves looked like to those people in their small life rafts, or worse, for those who had capsized. Our film technicians have found some much damaged footage of 2 survivors filmed only hours after the disaster in a civil defence shelter. We have carefully cleaned and restored the film. This is the first time it has been shown to the New Zealand public.
Let's roll that footage now.
How are you? Are you okay? Oh gosh, are you warm enough?
Yes, we're fine.
Okay. Are we rolling?
Yes.
Right. I'm Ree, and joining me now are 2 survivors of today's disaster. So,
Can you please tell me, how are the people around you responding to the situation?
They were very frightened. They were screaming their heads off. It was like a scene from a scary movie. This is something I'll never forget.
Some mothers were holding their babies very tight, but some rude men were trying to kick the babies off. They said the babies are too heavy. The ship will drown. Everyone was screaming. I don't want to believe this is true.
Oh gosh, that sounds horrible. So, were you travelling alone or were you travelling with someone you know?
I was travelling with my friends and family.
I was travelling with my 3 best friends.
Did anybody get injured?
One of my friends and my brother had minor injuries.
One of them died because when she tried to hop on a lifeboat, someone pushed her in the sea. I was shocked. I can remember all the time I spent with her.
Up to our last question, what thoughts were going through your head when they said abandoned ship?
I thought I was going to die. I thought that all my family members were going to die and get lost forever.
I thought about all the people I love and I can't see them again. It was so terrifying.
Did you think it was an exciting experience?
No, it was not an exciting experience, but I have learnt some tips on how to abandon ship.
No, because I can always remember that horrible moment.
And we're out of time. Get these girls a hot drink.
A fascinating piece of New Zealand history. We're so lucky to have such amazing technology that allows us to still view it.
And now let us look at human error, being the possible reason for the sinking of the Wahine. Captain Hector Gordon Robertson had been caster of the ill-fated ferry for some time. He had sailed her to and from Wellington numerous times in strong winds and high seas, and was an experienced captain. It was Captain Robertson's decision to enter the harbour when they did. They had arrived 20 minutes behind schedule when freak gusts of 100 knots or more struck the vessel and put them out of line. He was quoted at that time as saying, "If those ones had struck 5 minutes later, we would have been through the entrance and could have come down the harbour. We could have come down and dropped anchor in Oriental Bay, where it was quite calm."
Some people suggested that Captain Robertson was too late in his decision to put the passengers into the life rafts. They have suggested they should have been evacuated much earlier. Captain Robertson, however, feels he made the right decision, saying, people who say that don't know what they are talking about. If I had put them off any earlier, everyone would have been lost. I would have had 600 lives on my conscience."
In a moment, we will take a closer look at the weather on that fateful day. But now, let's look at an interview given by Mubin in 1972. This interview may give us some insight as to what was happening on the bridge that day.
Hello, I'm Mubin, and joining us is now Moses and Offa. Moses, what did you notice when the ship struck the reef?
That the ship started to tilt on its side. It was hard for us crew members to get sick, and struggling people on the lifeboats with flying lifeboats, people screaming and jumping overboard, and people sliding down the ship.
Offa, what sort of decision had to be made once the ship hit the Barrett Reef?
Well, the first decision was to put life jackets on all passengers, then figure out something with the little children, which couldn't fit. And as we were moving, we heard funny noises, and waves kept on bashing near our ship.
Thank you for your time. It must be an exhausting night for you two.
Fascinating old footage there. Let's look at the weather on the 10th of April 1968. It certainly was a terrible day to be stuck outside New Zealand.
Cyclone Giselle was first reported on the 5th of April 1968 when it hit French Caledonia with storm warnings issued throughout New Zealand the next day. Early on the 9th of April, Cyclone Giselle hit Cape Reinga. Winds of up to 160 kilometers an hour caused massive damage to buildings. Torrential rain flooded farmland in Northland, drowning hundreds of farm animals. A farmer was also killed when it was blown off a haystack. The cyclone's pattern of damage continued as it travelled across the North Island, but turned south down the east coast. Ships were driven ashore and landslips closed roads. Rain caused massive flooding and wind left roofs torn off and windows broken.
By the time Cyclone Giselle hit Wellington on the morning of the 10th of April, another storm had driven up the west coast of the South Island from Antarctica. The two storms met over the capital, causing huge damage. Winds in Wellington were the strongest ever recorded, at one point reaching speeds of 275 kilometers an hour. As the storm moved on to the South Island, hundreds of Christchurch houses lost their roofs and both Avon and Heathcote rivers flooded. Throughout Canterbury, over 500 hectares of forest were destroyed. In Southland, flooding was the worst since 1913. Some people were stranded on the roofs of their houses and had to be rescued by jet boat. Cyclone Giselle finally blew out somewhere in the Southern Ocean.
And there you have it, folks. Perhaps if weather forecasting could have been what is now, the Wahine disaster would never have happened. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Asopi. What an incredible storm it must have been.
Well, that's all we have time for this evening. We hope you have learnt something about your country's history and about one of our darkest days.
Please join us next week when we focus on the Springbok Tour of 1981.
Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next time. From the whole team at Spotlight on New Zealand, goodbye.
E noho rā.